Most founding teams don't blow up overnight. They actually erode. And yet, the signs are there all along, well before the blow up, if you know what to look for. Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Jones. I'm a licensed psychologist and co-founder coach. I've been working exclusively with venture-backed and bootstrapped co-founding teams for the last 6 years. And my sole mission in life is to bring more clarity and understanding to this relationship between you and your co-founder. I want to start by reviewing a document I wrote with you on this topic of some of the key warning signs that your relationship is in decline. So for context, most founding teams don't actually recognize that they're in trouble until they're in crisis. And by the time you're at that point of crisis, you've already done significant damage to the relationship between you and your co-founder. And the thing that I, as a co-founder coach, find so frustrating and challenging is that those signs are present the entire time. And the difficulty within the context of your psychology as a founder is you're like a marathon runner, right? You're like somebody who has trained their entire lives to allow that ache in their knee to be just pushed aside. You know, you push through, you persevere, you're very resilient. You have a degree of tolerance for difficulty that other people can't even imagine. And so you've built this tolerance, like calloused hands, over years of hard work. And for you, it's actually, maybe stepping off the gas, ending the race early and recovering that actually might be, more challenging and uncomfortable for you. But my point is that you're so used to overcoming your own discomfort and overlooking it so that you can work harder, so that you can achieve your ultimate mission of growing and scaling your company, that you overlook these small relational ruptures between you and your co-founder that are important data points that are asking for intervention, that are asking for more structure, more conversation than you give them credit. And so I want to bring some attention to some of these early warning signs that do show up if you are paying attention. I want to start by saying the majority of the earliest signs you'll notice tend to be about communication quality, not conflict frequency. So I work with some teams, and some of this literature comes from emotion-focused couples therapy. Sue Johnson's work, if you're familiar with her, does some fantastic work that's based fundamentally on attachment theory. And she talks about various types of relationships that might be categorized in some of this language as a pursue partnership, or a withdraw partnership, or most commonly a pursue-withdraw partnership. And each of these relational configurations looks slightly different. Let me use slightly different language for this to land. If you and your co-founder get into frequent arguments, and they escalate and they lead to a lot of frustration, and that frustration boils over, and you find yourself raising your voice in the office, you are more likely on the pursue side of this partnership, or in imago therapy, they call this like a maximizer, like two maximizers. And so there's this frustration that really boils over. So you guys are probably having a lot of frequent disagreements. On the other side of the spectrum is the withdraw, which in imago, it would be two minimizers. So these are individuals whose nervous system actually shuts down whenever they feel overwhelmed. And so whenever I work with teams more on this side of the spectrum, the biggest issue is honestly not about conflict. It's about the avoidance of conflict. And so you might find yourself there. But most commonly, most founding teams will be in some type of a pursue or withdraw type of dynamic, meaning one person pushes, the other pulls. In an example between me and my wife, in this case, just to humanize it a bit, she would be more on the pursue side. So, Matt, I'm so frustrated you didn't take the trash out today. And I will be on the withdraw side of, kind of defensiveness, shutting down, withdrawing, disengaging, that kind of thing. And so that dynamic, though, is at the center of most attachment-based relationships, and thus shows up in this relationship with your co-founder. And so what I see is not most often, this pursue high conflict partnership. I usually see it's one of these either pursue, withdraw, or withdraw. Meaning, the issue is not going to be, hey, we're having all these insane fights. Usually, it's, hey, it seems like we're not communicating effectively, or we're not making effective decisions, or I notice myself not asking for the product roadmap as often. Like I said it once and then I haven't followed up, right? And so what ends up happening is co-founders start talking less and being less effective in their communications. And so the conversations that once felt really easy and effortless, where you would just kind of throw something out the wall, or you'd be very direct with your feedback and your co-founder could handle it and would respond appropriately and just kind of meet you in that, all of a sudden it feels more labored. It starts to feel like the communication is not as efficient, not as simple and seamless as it was in the past. I was on a call today with a first coaching session with a new team. And part of what I noticed in exercise I had them do was it felt so laborious. It felt like they were choosing each word so carefully. And they were. And so as I talked to them more about that, the thing that was so interesting is, on one hand, it helped them say and feel this person cares about the relationship. They're being very mindful and intentional with how they're communicating with me. And that shows care and compassion. Simultaneously, it generates a little bit of anxiety, because if you're choosing your words this carefully in front of me, then am I really getting the full story? Can I really trust that you are saying with full transparency all the different thoughts in your head, or are you holding back from me? That generates anxiety. Or, another acknowledgement was, hey, I feel a bit disappointed and saddened, because it makes me realize that if we're tiptoeing on these eggshells with one another and being so careful about every single word, it's a sign of our decreased trust and the lost friendship that has been a casualty because we got to this point. So I bring all of that up because these subtle communication dynamics do start very, very early in relational ruptures. And so when you notice things like that, like you have something you want to tell your co-founder, but you're filtering, you're holding it back, that is a huge red flag. And it doesn't mean everything's on fire. To be clear, I'm not saying your partnership is doomed if you have this one red flag. What I'm saying is that data requires self-reflection, and it requires the courage to engage in that sharing of the observation interpersonally. Meaning, say the elephant in the room. Because if you don't articulate that of like, hey, I'm noticing that I'm more hesitant to share certain things with you. And that those certain things could be tied to certain categories. Like, I feel more concerned to share interpersonal feedback with you, or professional feedback, or to challenge something in your domain, or whatever, fill in the blank. But you need to do that mental work ahead of time to figure out, what are those specific areas that I no longer feel comfortable sharing with my co-founder? And then name that and have meta communication. So talk to your co-founder about how you are communicating. Similarly, if you feel like the meetings are having a script, or maybe you have too much structure or not enough structure, those can all be things that are important data points. So I work with some teams where a main issue, especially in like pre-seed as we're trying to get off the ground, might be a need for a little bit more process and clarity of communication channels and frequency and that type of stuff. So we might need to clean up comms a little bit, because it's too messy, it's too all over the place, too disorganized. Or on the flip side, if it feels like we're just following a script and our hearts aren't really in it, again, all of this is data. All of this is very important. The other thing that I think can happen for teams is either small disagreements that used to be able to get resolved relatively quickly don't, and they linger. Or what I would say more importantly is there's an absence of repair where there used to be a little bit more, or there used to be a little bit more compassion or empathy. So what this looks like is, if you guys have, let's just say, a business disagreement, right? Like you disagree on, your go-to-market strategy, whatever the case may be. And you're having that conversation, you go back and forth, it gets heated. In the past, you may have bounced back very quickly. You may have been like, oh yeah, listen, man, totally understand your perspective on that. It makes sense why you'd feel XYZ because of ABC data points. Yeah, I hear you. Or whatever. There would be some statement, some kind of olive branch, metaphorically, that was given within the interpersonal relationship to repair. Or maybe you have this heated disagreement, then you go out for dinner, and then it blows over. You feel more connected. Whatever however that looks for you. There can be active and passive repair. Active being, man, so sorry for this impact. etc. Passive repair, doing things together outside of work that humanize and help the relationship really continue to develop. When things start going sideways, you will notice less repair actively and or passively, and less of those empathetic moments of connection. And so that leads to disagreements taking longer than they should to resolve, and also leading to increased emotional residue or emotional debt that in the startup environment you're in can quickly compound. So those are some of those early, very subtle warning signs, but they do escalate from there. So when emotional debt compounds, it starts to leak out. And where I want to start here that I think is so important, and I don't think this is on the document, is when emotional debt compounds, you start telling yourself stories about the other person's intent. In particular, what I mean is this. If Mark, my fictional co-founder, interrupted me 3 times in an all-hands meeting, the story I'm telling myself is Mark doesn't give a shit about my opinion, which is so frustrating. And you may not even respect me. Like I feel so offended. And so I might say something like, "Hey, Mark, bro, like you don't care what I have to say. Like you clearly don't respect me." And Mark's gonna have to defend his reality. He's gonna be like, "Whoa, Matt, like I can't believe you're coming at me so hard." And now I feel kind of upset that you assume those things about me, right? And that creates this whole defensive loop, which happy to add some tools and skills to help you avoid that. But the reason I bring it up is when you start noticing that the story you're telling yourself about your co-founder, about what's going on in their head, is a negative story, such as she's selfish, such as they don't care what I have to say, etc. These are all important warning signs, because what your brain is starting to do is it's starting to create confirmation bias. So now all of a sudden, the story I have about Mark, that he's, let's say, selfish and doesn't respect me, doesn't care about me, my brain will now filter every data point through those lenses. And so now I will exclusively, I will not pay attention to evidence to the contrary. And instead, I will only see things that confirm that underlying emotional hypothesis. So that is a very important seed that leads to what the Gottman Institute calls a negative sentiment override, which is interpreting a neutral or positive statement by your partner as something inherently negative. And that's a sign of decreased trust and a consequence of it. So the other thing that you might notice that things are escalating is venting to employees. I would also say venting to investors, which hopefully you don't do, because that can create a lot of negative secondary effects. But another common pattern here is, a team member might come to you complaining about your co-founder. What you do in that moment is of exceptional high leverage and impact, because if you engage with them and kind of collude and say, yeah, like, man, Mark sucks, whatever the case may be, you disempower Mark. You actually create a lot of instability in the organization, and you disproportionately put on too much caretaking responsibility onto that parentified employee. I do see this, by the way. I've worked with certain VCs, et cetera, where this dynamic certainly happens, and other agencies too. So this is not unheard of. The reason I bring it up, though, is that's what we don't want to do. And we also don't want to vent to them. And so if any of that starts to happen, very, very clear sign that things are escalating. Another one that's not on here that I'll add is you stay up late at night thinking about the argument with your co-founder instead of your product, or heaven forbid, getting some sleep. So that's another major sign that there's something wrong in this partnership. Whenever it starts eating those CPUs in the background, that's a major issue. The other thing is sometimes conversations around equity, compensation, roles and responsibilities, titles, all of that decision-making authority, all of those big pieces either are circular, repetitive, unhelpful, and ultimately stay unresolved, or they get deferred. If either of those are happening, here's your sign. Another thing is if you notice that you're working in parallel now, but it doesn't feel collaborative. It feels like you're kind of parallel tracking and not having as many touch points. That's another really clear sign that there's something relationally that's happening. And this can culminate in the loss of psychological safety. So feeling like you're editing yourself, you're censoring yourself, you're not being fully direct and honest. These are all signs that this emotional debt is really compounding and starting. My guess is at this point, it's impacting you personally, it's impacting you professionally, and therefore it's impeding your ability to build a successful company. And it's really starting to have operational impingement. And unfortunately, most founders wait way too long before coming in to work with a co-founder coach because of that high pain threshold I mentioned earlier. You can tolerate a lot of that distress, but usually whenever you start seeing it truly have negative ROI in the business, that's whenever you reach out to someone like myself. And the entire purpose of this article is to tell you, and this video is to tell you, that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to wait until there's operational level consequences for an interpersonal and emotional issue between you and your co-founder. You can fix that far earlier and far faster. Okay, last point. Part of what starts to happen is this becomes the default blueprint of the culture of your organization. And so conflict does not stay contained with just the co-founders. Part of what I had a conversation with a sales manager at a tech startup the other day. Part of what he told me was, Matt, I notice, we were at a kid's birthday party for context. He was like, Matt, I noticed that when co-founder A walks in the room and says something, co-founder B kind of makes a face, right? Like, and he started breaking down all of the tensions that he perceives in the founding team. And he's like, I might have a referral for you. I'm just sitting there thinking like, my goodness, man, like I of course bias to the founder's perspective because I work exclusively with founders. I do some leadership team work as well, especially if it makes sense to kind of scale these changes throughout the rest of your org. But because that's my primary unit of intervention, we have these conversations that very much clearly implicate other employees, but I still don't think most of the founders I work with are fully conscious of the extent to which their conflicts are fully visible to the rest of the organization. And not only that, but there's some new research that came out of an organization that I'm part of called Startup Snapshot, where they did this survey about kind of stress and mental health dynamics. They started it with the kind of founders, and then they started doing it a little bit more with employees. What they discovered was super interesting. Startup employees have greater stress and greater anxiety than founders. Why? Because founders have a higher locus of control. Despite, you feeling like, oh my God, I'm on this roller coaster and I'm trying to do everything that I can, you still have far more control than your employees who are kind of at your beck and call and your strategic direction, et cetera. And so because of that relative disempowerment to the founder, they disproportionately absorb stress in the system. And that's only further amplified by the relationship with your co-founder, especially if there's misalignment. Which is why in my book, I go over the co-founder conflict impact matrix. So I try to document all of this because this is why it leads to increased churn and problems with retention in companies where this conflict has not been contained. And so the other thing is, sometimes it feels like you're performing fine, but there's some sensitivity, there's some cracks in the foundation that you're not really wanting to acknowledge. And so, I was talking to a founder today who's like, Matt, listen, I know my co-founder has to exit. There's no way, like we've exhausted every single possibility. Operationally, it no longer makes sense. But the thing he told me is, Matt, it's not the right time. And I've heard him say that for the last 3 years. So just take that for what it's worth. And the other thing is, if people ask you, investors, board, advisors, other people like that, ask you questions, you might disagree. Or what I see more often is instead of you not being able to answer things together, your power dynamics and your interpersonal dynamics are something that they're seeing too, right? Like some of those dysfunctions, and some of them will, try to be supportive in helping you debug and realign. Others won't say anything, but internally they're absolutely noticing because I have conversations with them as well. So what I want you to take away from this video is I want you to have the courage to name and articulate what's happening between you and your co-founder. So naming these escalating warning signs is the absolute first step. And I want you to do this with your co-founder and being able to say something to the effect of, hey, I think something shifted between us and I want to talk about it. That alone can be a massive unlock and a massive step one that will help you on this journey to get realigned. And the only other thing is taking action sooner while there's more relational tissue and connection and less emotional debt disproportionately leads to better outcomes than if you wait until it's an absolute crisis. Because whenever it's an absolute crisis, that's impacting every single level of your life and your business. And there's much less emotional bandwidth to be able to make productive changes. It absolutely happens. That's what I do every day, but I don't want you to have to wait to that point to reach out. So if any of this sounds interesting to you and you'd like to learn more, I personally guarantee there's no other book that you can read that puts all of this information psychologically through actual frameworks to use with your co-founder they're actionable than this book. I wrote The Cofounder Effect: How to Diagnose, Fix, and Scale Healthy Communication for Startup Success. It's available on Amazon. I'll also link it in the show notes below. Cheers.